All right. Thank you for joining us today for our medical review, targeted probe, and educate reviews that are going to be coming in 2025. So this includes both J5 and J8, both parts, A and B. My name's Mary Sue Gardner, and I'm a registered nurse on the Provider Outreach and Education team, and I'm going to be your facilitator for today's event. And I'm also joined today by other members of Provider Outreach and Education, as well as Medical Review, who are going to be helping with the chat portion of today's event. So some housekeeping items. On our website, WPSGHA.com, we have a training center. Hopefully this is where you went to register for this live event. In our training center, you have access to all of our training material. You have the ability to register for upcoming events, as well as access our encores, so those recording of our live events. We post our most recent encores to our training center because we have a built-in YouTube player, which helps for those of you who can't go to YouTube through your company computer. This is a built-in player. So you can watch these events, again, without having to go to YouTube. These encores are generally available on our training center for about 60 to 90 days, but they're always available on our YouTube page until more current information replaces it. To find our training center, go to WPSGHA.com, then click on the Training Center from the top navigation, and you're going to find the Live Events tab. If you have feedback about your experience today, again, there'll be several opportunities during and after this event to take the survey. If you're listening to the encore of this event, just watch for that survey link to pop up on the top of the screen at various points throughout the recording. And then also at the end, there'll be a link and a link in the description. Again, the CMS Qualtrics survey is your opportunity to get feedback on our event. So we want to know about your experience with the event. The survey is your opportunity to not only tell us about your satisfaction with the event, but also let us know what additional education you want in the future. Our disclaimer, we have to show this for every event, and the disclaimer basically says we prepared this as a tool to help you, our provider community. But it is pertinent to know that Medicare laws, rules, and regulations often change. If Medicare laws, rules, and regulations happen to change tomorrow, you need to make sure you are following the most current laws, rules, and regulations for the date of service you are practicing. So we are going to base our answers today on the most current laws, rules, and regulations as they stand today, but please know that Medicare rules always have final determination of coverage. We ask that you don't record this presentation or take screenshots of it. We are doing that for you, and we are going to post it for you on our Encore page and our YouTube page. All right. CPT copyright notice, I have to give you this because I have CPT codes embedded in this presentation, so you can read this at your leisure if you so choose. Acronyms. Medicare's full of acronyms. We always say it's like acronym soup. So here are some acronyms that I will probably use during the course of this presentation today. If I happen to use an acronym that you don't understand and it's not listed here, just go ahead and put that into the chat, address that to all panelists, and one of my coworkers will, give you the answer to what it is. We're so used to speaking in Medicare acronyms that sometimes they just roll off our tongue, they're second nature to us. All right, which brings us to today's event. My objective for today is that you'll learn about the various targeted probe and educate reviews that are going to be coming to your jurisdiction and your part of Medicare in the upcoming year. We're going to review a little bit about the TPE process, and then we're going to give a high-level overview of the topics that will be coming for 2025. So I do say this is a high-level overview. We're not doing in-depth education on each of these topics, but instead this is to bring that announcement, to bring the awareness. If you provide these types of services that are going to be under review in your jurisdiction and part, it's always a good idea to start looking at the regulations regarding that. And that's what we want to point out today. As the upcoming months go by, when different topics are coming to review, I will be doing more in-depth education about that specific topic. And then a few months after that topic has been under review, I'm going to come back and do another presentation and talk about the review findings. So that way, everyone has the opportunity to know what we're finding and what to avoid yourself if you should happen to be chosen for that review. So let's move on. What's the goal of targeted medical review? It's really to help providers and suppliers reduce claim denials and reduce appeals. And we do that through one-on-one education and help. So when someone's on a targeted probe and educate review, we look at the actual documentation from you as a provider for that specific service, and we walk you through the process as we review your claims. We help you identify what those errors are. We educate you on how to correct those. If we need to do additional reviews on you, we will. And we kind of handhold you through the entire process. And it's not intended to be a negative process. It's actually intended to be a positive process so we can help you make sure you get the money you deserve for the good services that you provide. So what can you expect during a TPE review? Kind of a high-level overview is when we decide that we are going to review something, we do data analysis on it. We determine if there is an issue with that type of service. We want to go after services that are at risk to the Medicare Trust Fund and pose a risk to WPS's processing of claims that affect the Medicare Trust Fund. So we're looking at those types of errors that pose the biggest risk. And then from those, then we determine what providers in that pose the biggest risk. When we determine what providers we are going to look at, then we notify the providers. We do that by phone and in writing. So we establish a point of contact. We call you. You can look on our website. We have a lot of information about the targeted probe and educate process. But we're going to contact you. We're going to establish a point of contact. You're going to know you are under review. And then you will have a point of contact with us. So your point of contact will have someone with WPS that they will work with. We're going to reach out to you for errors and issues that are easily curable during the course of the review. And then following the end of your total review, we're going to provide you some education on what we saw overall, especially if we decide that, additional reviews may be necessary. So that's kind of high level on what goes on, as far as targeted probe and educate reviews. Again, quick and high level, but I want to focus today on really what reviews are going to be happening in the coming year. So we're going to start with J5A, so Nebraska, Iowa, Kansas, Missouri. And then that could include some of our J5 national providers that are in other states but still billing to WPS as their MAC. All right, so for J5 Part A, we have CT of the abdomen, which is going to include the CPT codes of 74176 and 74177. So that's a CT scan, abdomen and pelvis. The 76 is with contrast and the 77 is without. We're also going to be looking at IV immune globulins, but that also, most of these codes are IV, but does include an IM code of tetanus. So let's break down and start with CT of the abdomen first. This review is going to start in February. So again, I told you the CPT codes affected are the 74176 and the 74177. We chose these because these codes represent a significant risk in total dollars at risk, so greater than 99th percentile. And the total dollars at risk per claim were greater than the 50th percentile. So when we did data analysis, we determined that these codes really pose a high risk to the Medicare Trust Fund to be reported inappropriately or used inappropriately. We are going to use the NCD, so NCD 220.1, that's the computed tomography, and our reviews are going to focus on medical necessity for the condition and also verification of the use of contrast media when the bill is, is for the 74117. So that's with contrast. I think I said those backwards before, but when contrast material is being used, we're going to review that as well. So some general information on CT. So when scans are, most always covered for as long as they meet medical necessity and they're safe and effective for use, that the service is medically reasonable and necessary for that patient. And this is the appropriate first line to scan a patient, for the symptomology that they have or for the diagnosis you are trying to make. So they have to be performed on an approved model of CT equipment. And again, we're going to be following the indications for coverage in the NCD. So in your presentation, this is hyperlinked to take you to the actual NCD. So I'm going to jump out and hopefully, if my computer plays nice, it may not want to play. Oh, here we go. Just a little slow rolling. All right. So here's the information where we're going to utilize the NCD documentation or the NCD information to help our review decisions. If you don't have this direct link, there are ways you can find this NCD. And I'm going to back all the way up really quick because this will be the same type of information, whether it's an NCD, an LCD, et cetera. So I want to show you this one time before we move on. I am a searcher, not a navigator, but you can get to the Medicare coverage database where all NCDs and all LCDs are housed. And you can get to that in a couple of different ways. I'm a searcher, so I tend to go to the search bar, and you can just type MCD for Medicare coverage database and hit enter, and then you see there are a couple of options that come up, and they're going to take you to the exact same place. The other option is you can do the drop down in Medicare. If you're a navigator, you can go to coverage and then select Medicare coverage database. Once you get here, if you don't know that NCD number, and I said it was NCD 220.1, if you just type in computed tomography, and whoops, PHY, yes. You're going to see the NCD pops up here. You're going to also see some possible LCD matches, but we're interested in the NCD. So in the absence of having that handout in front of you, you can always go to the Medicare coverage database and find it that way. If you're going to be in and out of it, I do encourage you to add it to your basket, and that way it kind of stays on your screen. So if you go into another search, it's up there, and you can just go back and reselect that and open it back up. So if you're looking at maybe several things that day. All right, so a few things about this. There is some description information in the NCD here that gives you background information, and then it goes into items and services and general descriptions of use. Following that are your indications and limitations of coverage. And I'm not going to go into, all of this information because we'll highlight that when I do another full webinar on the CT of the abdomen, in the upcoming year. But knowing you could potentially be at risk for being looked at if you were in J5A, these are the things you want to go through and the coverage criteria that you want to make sure you are meeting. I said it has to be on an approved type of device. Here's where that evidence of approval information is. There's information on mobile equipment, different types of place of service settings, information about, claim reviews, etc. So again, I'm not spending a lot of information on the actual coverage itself, but I want to point you to where you find this information. All right. So moving back, that kind of gives us some high-level information on the CT of the abdomen. Next for J5A is the IVIG or immune globulins, mostly IV, but we're also throwing in a tetanus. And we decided to look at this information because these codes actually also on data analysis pose a significant risk in the dollars at risk of greater than 99 percentile as well. And the total dollars at risk per claim are greater than 75th percentile. So our local coverage determination, the LCD L34771, that's going to be what we use to provide the coverage criteria and guidelines for this review. Now, move on. I have some general information here, and I have some information about the LCD. But one thing I do want to tell you is that I just did a webinar on the immune globulins yesterday, where we talked about the upcoming reviews as well as the local coverage determination. So if this is something you're interested in, Jennifer's going to actually place a link to the YouTube video into the into the chat, because that encore actually is live. So if you did not have the opportunity to listen to that yesterday, that's going to be your opportunity to branch out and go listen to that. So again, I don't have that on your slide because this was made in advance, and that event was hosted yesterday, and Jennifer put the link into the chat for the YouTube encore if you want to go out and listen to it. So a little bit about IVIG. IVIG provides immediate antibody levels, and there are actually 32 conditions for use in our LCD for IVIG. In yesterday's event, we talked about all the conditions for use on immunoglobulins, because we went through that LCD as well. But remember, when it comes to your documentation and administering immune globulins, you must make sure your medical records indicate the reason why they're needed. So that's the most important thing. So that's the one thing we're going to definitely be looking at. The administration of immune globulins can't be routine, and in some cases, the documentation is going to need to support if there were past unsuccessful interventions. So again, there's a link in this slide deck that's going to take you to the local coverage determination for this. And I'm going to link out there really fast and show you. I say really fast, and then my computer goes really slow. And show you the LCD. Now, the same way I showed you how to search things in the NCD database for that NCD, you can use for the LCD. The one thing I do caution you about when you search for a local coverage determination, if you are searching by topic title and just say you put in immune globulins, make sure that you are choosing the one for your contractor. So we are your Medicare administrative contractor, and this is the WPS local coverage determination. So you always want to make sure you're choosing the right thing. And then as you go through here, here's the coverage guidance for all immune globulins. It gives coverage indications and limitations. Here's some information about the tetanus under the broad spectrum. It goes down to give more detailed information and those 32 different diagnoses we talked about for the IVIG, which a lot of those HCPCS codes fell under the IVIG. So it goes on to give you some high-level documentation requirements, etc. Know, though, when we choose a provider for review, we send out an additional documentation request for you to submit that documentation. When we send out that ADR request, it gives you a full list of the documentation that we want you to submit. We also will have articles on all of these things on our website for you to go out and review, which also generally contain all the documentation requirements. And then at the end of all local coverage determinations is a link to the local coverage article on billing and coding. So I do encourage you to go out and look at the billing and coding articles that are associated with it, because this will tell you about code combinations of CPT codes and diagnoses codes that are required for use on those immune globulins. And all of our LCDs have an associated local coverage article for billing and coding. All right. So I just wanted, again, to give you a high level of that because it will be, you know, something we are looking at in the upcoming year. Whoops. All right. So as we move on, let's look at J5 Part B. J5 Part B, we're going to be reviewing home dialysis, which is the physician service code of 90966. And we're going to be looking at the removal of benign lesions, which is the CPT code 17110. And these are the full definitions of those codes. So as we move on, home dialysis, that review is actually going to start next month. So December of 2024, so in the fiscal year for 2025. So providers that are chosen for this review, those providers are already in the process of being identified, and notification will start, you know, the end of this month, beginning of next month. So you will know right away within the next several weeks if you are chosen for review and you are a provider that provides home dialysis services. So this issue was actually identified by the CERT contractor. So we follow CERT reviews and CERT findings very closely because we don't want to have an error rate by the CERT contractor. So if they're reviewing it and they're finding errors, most likely we will start reviewing it as well. So the projected error rate on this one, identified by the CERT contractor, was 91.6%. And it included that physician code of 90966, which is allowed once per patient per month. So that's what we're going to be following. We're going to use the guidelines found in the Medicare Benefit Policy, Chapter 11, for these reviews. So as you go to the Medicare Benefit Policy Manual, again, which is, I have linked you right here to it, but if I were to go to cms.gov, and I'll just do it here, the easy way to find is either do a search for your regulations guidance or IOMs or however you want to list that. It will all get you to the same place. I'm going to go to manuals. I'm going to go to internet-only manuals, and here's the internet-only manuals. I myself have saved my a link up here to go straight to the internet-only manuals for me because I'm in them so often. So in this, we said that the information, and I have to look here really quick, is Benefit Policy Manual, Chapter 11. Whoops. So let's go back. So I'm going to go to the Benefit Policy Manual, and then I'll scroll down to Chapter 11, which is all things end-stage renal disease. So we're going to use the information in here, starting in Section 30 on home dialysis, to guide us in these reviews. So if you're a provider of this service, this is the information that you're going to want to review in advance. Make sure you are following it. Make sure you have and are meeting all the coverage indications, etc. And again, those reviews are starting already next month, so that notification will start going out to you providers in the next several weeks. If you're not chosen for a review, for any of these services, doesn't mean we can't expand reviews in upcoming months. So that's why I think it's really important to listen to this type of education and know what's coming, because if we have a lot of review findings in any of these services, then we, as those TPEs finish, we can select additional providers if we find that it still continues to pose a significant risk. So we'll pick the top providers, then we would pick the next set of providers that fall under that, kind of in a ranking of who poses the greatest risk to who poses the least amount of risk. Whoops. All right, so some general information on the home dialysis. There is payment for home dialysis and payment for renal dialysis that's furnished to home for home dialysis. And again, that information is under that Medicare Benefit Policy Manual, and there's covered under end-stage renal disease, and under PPS, it is not paid separately. So again, you're going to want to follow that information out there and make sure you are providing it and billing it appropriately. The ESRD facility, you are the ones that are responsible for the overall management of that home dialysis patient. So it's your responsibility to make sure you have all the documentation, make sure that you are billing appropriately, etc. So again, all items listed in this could be, part of the review for that home dialysis. All right. And then finally, under J5B, we're going to be looking at that removal of benign lesions. That review is going to start in February of 2024. So we actually identified this issue. It was identified during our data analysis. And we're going to focus on this procedure code of the 17110. And we found that that represented a significant risk in total dollars greater than the 95th percentile. And that was when compared to other procedure codes within the jurisdiction for different types of lesion removals. We have an LCD. So the WPS LCD, the L35498, and that is titled Removal of Benign Skin Lesions, and that's going to provide the basis for our review criteria. Again, that'll come up if you use the direct link. You can do a search, put removal of benign skin lesions, verify that you are using a WPS local coverage determination, and then again, as you go through, here's your coverage guidelines, including indications, limitations, supporting medical necessity, and then it will go down and give you more information about documentation requirements and then your LCA. Remember, we will be making articles and posting them on the WPS website about each of these reviews, and it will have the documentation information as well. I'm going to just quick show you. So depending on where you practice and what part of Medicare, I'm going to just pick J5 Medicare Part A. I'm going to go to the Topic Center. I'm going to go to Medical Review, and I can click on this Targeted Probe and Educate Review process and get more information about overall TPE reviews. Or I can go down here and see what reviews are happening in my area. And so here's that CT of the abdomen and pelvis. And here's where we give you more information about the background on the review, symptomology, what types of things and documentation we need to see, etc. Additional resources, and there'll be an article out here for every type of these reviews. And they'll be housed where, you know, we had said they'd be housed. So the J5B, the home dialysis, will be under J5B. So you would just choose your jurisdiction and part of Medicare. All right, so moving on, a little bit general information. If you're going to be doing removal of benign skin lesions, we need to know the medical indications for that. We need to know if there was any type of repair or closure that's being done. We would want to see the procedure reports that are being done with it. There's limitations and documentation requirements that I just showed you in the LCD that you should make sure you're following. Again, tell us the type of removal, the technique, etc. And all of that information is really outlined in our policy as well. So J8, switching gears from the J5 people to the J8 people. J8A, we are going to start looking at outpatient rehabilitative therapy services, so outpatient that are billed from a facility. And the code is going to focus on the 97530, which is therapeutic activities. And that's a time code. That's a 15-minute code. So we have identified the issue ourselves, and we have identified that it poses a risk of to the dollars at risk greater than the 99th percentile and per claim greater than the 50th percentile when compared to other procedure codes. So a little bit of general information. Again, remember that is a time code with 1 unit standing for 15 minutes of therapy service. And we're going to use the information in the Benefit Policy Manual, Chapter 15, Sections 220 to 230 to guide us for that. So when you're considering whether an activity you are having the patient perform is classified as a therapeutic activity or if it falls under a different category, some questions you should ask yourself are things like, is this a functional activity, like climbing stairs? Will this improve that patient's functional performance? Is there more than one parameter like strengthening, conditioning, et cetera, being addressed with this activity? And does that activity correspond or relate to like a specific work or sport task that the patient's going to be performing once they've recovered? So if you're answering yes to those questions, then you are probably good with billing the 97530. Therapy is kind of my jam, so I kind of get on a little tangent about therapy. All right, and then J8 Part B. So not as much reviews going on in the J8 jurisdiction, but J8 Part B, we're going to be looking at intravitreal injections that are billed with the E&M code and modifier 25. So the CPT code, the 67028, for those intravitreal injections of a pharmaceutical agent. And then again, when it's billed, same claim with the E&M code and a modifier 25 appended to that. So this issue was actually identified by the Office of Inspector General, or the OIG, and you can go out and just search intravitreal injection, OIG report, and find several articles out there on what they identified with some specific reviews and specific providers they looked at. We're going to focus our claims that are billed with that specialty code 18, which is ophthalmology, and the intravitreal code of 67028, again, along with that E&M code and modifier 25. So the review's really going to focus to help us identify if a separate and unrelated service was performed to support the use of that additional E&M code and modifier. So not as much on was this appropriate. We will look to make sure this is still medically appropriate and necessary to bill, but is doing a separate E&M code on the same date, was that medically reasonable and necessary? So that's a lot of information and a lot of different high-level things that are coming in the upcoming year. I know we only have a couple of minutes left in this, and I know there's been some questions that have come in, but I want to ask Jennifer if there's some high-level questions that we can maybe answer before we finish up with closing remarks.
We did get a question about whether CPT code 17110 is already being targeted, or is it February 2025? And I did put in the chat that it starts February 2025. Let's see. And I'll just ask a question for that one. They were asking if this is for professional billing, CMS 1500, and not billing submitted by the outpatient hospital UB04.
And that was the removal of benign skin lesions is what we're asking about?
Yes.
Okay. Are we looking at the professional billing and not billing submitted by the outpatient hospital? So this one falls under the Part B. This one, we are focusing on this code under the outpatient services, which also means that it will fall under any kind of professional billing as well. So not inpatient on this one. And yes, you are correct, not services billed on a UB04 or an inpatient type claim. All right. And then I think if there's some more specific questions that we haven't gotten, I will relook at those and send out a response to those specific providers if it's something, you know, onesie, twosie. If it's pertinent to everyone, I'll send the information out in an email to everyone. There's just a few additional questions in there, and we'll make sure that those are all addressed to that person that asked. All right, so in the interest of time, I'm gonna click forward again. Additional resources. So I like to give the resources within the presentation. I showed you how to use the presentation to, you know, go right to the source, because I like to direct you right to the source. But here's some other information that may be helpful to you about some of the upcoming reviews and the targeted probe and educate process itself. All right. So a couple other things I want to talk about. The interactive voice response unit, the eligibility section of the interactive voice response unit, those functions are going to be disabled as of 1/1/2025. So there are other eligible sources where you can find eligibility information, and that includes the Secure Net Access or SNAP portal of WPS's website. For a direct data entry user, you can find that information there, or through the HET system or the HIPAA eligibility transaction system. If you want a little bit more information on why this decision was made, it's a CMS decision. It's to try to do everything possible to protect patients' protected health information. So we are going to disable it effective 1/1, and we do encourage you to start getting familiar and using these other sources of checking eligibility before this date. We're going to have a ton of education next month on this as well, and these different components. So watch for those in our live events page. All right, health equity actually means attaining the highest level of health for all people, where everyone has fair and just opportunity to obtain their optimal health, regardless of their race or ethnicity, disability, sexual orientation, etc. So CMS has information and has created a framework for health equity, a web page where you can learn a bunch more information on it. Really good web page. We do encourage you to go out and take a look at that and some of the coverage information that has been updated as a result of that. In a few minutes, if you haven't already, you're going to receive an email from us. Don't delete that email without reading it first. It looks similar to this. At the end of the email is your certificate of achievement information if you happen to need contact hours for continuing education. So that's in there. There's also a link to complete the survey, which we've talked about and we'll talk about again in a few minutes. But that's just an additional way to complete that. If you have follow-up questions that we did not get to, please send those questions to us at wps.gha.education@wpsic.com. Send those within the next 7 days and put TPE for 2025 or something like that in the subject line so they know to get that information to me to answer. And then finally, as I stated at the start, we really do value your opinion. We really do want to hear from you on how we did on this event. I know it was a lot of information, but a lot of good high-level information that's going to be followed up with additional education. So let us know what you think. If you like it, if you want more, it's your opportunity to tell us what more you want from us too, so we can bring you that additional education that's really meaningful to you. We take that information, those suggestions out of there, and we generally bring those forward in additional education. When this event closes, you're also going to be directed to an external site. It'll look something like this. It'll have say something about Qualtrics in there. That's just the WebEx's way of redirecting you, directly to that site. So it's not spam or anything like that. Again, I will look at any additional questions that have come in that we did not get to. I will respond to those people directly or via an email to everyone if I think the answer is pertinent to everyone. But on behalf of Jennifer and myself, as well as Medical Review, we want to thank you for your participation in today's event. Please watch for more in-depth education on these topics coming in the new year. This concludes our webinar for today, and you may now disconnect.